is all of the articles, all of the sites have very varied amount of information. For instance, the first thing I want to do is I want to go through each of the components that we know of and what they do. None of this information, or what's the actual way of saying that? You cannot find all of this information in one spot. Some of it comes from the fan wiki, some of it comes from SC Tools wiki, some of it comes from this engineering post, the shipyard, other posts, Q&As and things. So I pulled this from basically everywhere I could find to get definitions or make up definitions for components that I know what they do. So we're going to quickly run through all of the known components, and then we'll get into what each of these components or what the modifications are that we have in game, such as grade classification things. So we're going to start at the top. Power plants. Easy. Power plants supply the power that the rest of your ship will consume. This is the foundation on which other systems function. These also, I did try and update that. These cost fuel to produce power. So when you fill up your ship with hydrogen, one of the places it goes is the power plant to generate power. Coolers. Coolers are a necessary piece of equipment used on all ships in the Star System universe. Their purpose is to keep the quantum drive from overheating during immediate and long-distance use. Also, other stuff, they cool weapons and power plants, engines and things. So basically, if it has heat, if it generates heat, coolers are used to cool them. And basically, anything that uses power puts out heat. So easy kind of math there. The next one is shields. Shields protect the ship from spaceborne debris and hostile fire. Generators come in multiple sizes and have varying levels of segmentation. Single bubble, front, back, quadrant. I don't know if those still exist, but that's part of the description. On some sites, they also say shield and shield generators are separate. As far as I know, we only have shield generators, the component that is the shield component. I'm pretty sure there's only one type of shield component. Just shields. But some sites have it labeled separately. Fuel tanks or fuel in tanks. Some ships have fuel intakes. Allows you to scoop free hydrogen in the vacuum of space in the extreme upper atmosphere of gas giants to refill your working mass tank. So I believe all Origin ships have a fuel in tank, and the Starfarer, if I'm not mistaken, but not all ships do. It is a specialized kind of component. Component's kind of a misnomer for that one because the ship has the support. You can't just put a in-tank on a ship that doesn't have a spot for it. So technically it is a component, but it has to be a specialized ship component or fuel intake bay to use it. Fuel tanks. They are components that actually store the hydrogen fuel. There's another one for quantum fuel. So there's fuel and then quantum fuel tanks. These come into account when you start thinking of longer distance ships. They have said in very old posts that these will be switch outable for other things. So basically just avoid areas that you could maybe hide stuff in if you didn't need the fuel to go long distances. Possibly even more armored or whatnot. But most time in what we have right now is just our standard fuel tanks. They just hold the fuel that the ship is balanced with. And we'll talk about balance later. Radars. Radars are used to detect external elements like approaching ships, missiles, or debris. Now, this is different from scanners. Scanners are used to scan specific things or areas. So where a radar is a passive, shows you what's around you, scanning is to pull actual data from the environment. So if you're in-game and you turn on your actual scanner, you can point at a ship and see who owns it, what components it has, or if you're doing Xenothreat, it tells you how many people are inside it. Radar will not tell you that. It will just say there's a ship there. So, scanners also can be used for finding rocks.
Yeah, they've talked about like scanners for different industry things. For mining, if you're collecting gas, different professions. To get the type of information about the environment that you're looking for versus just generic scan ship, find info about ship. No, I want to know about that rock. I want to know about that nebula.
Yeah. Yeah, it won't be every scanner can find all the rocks because that's super annoying. If you're a combat pilot, you don't need to know where the rocks are. So you'll have a like a fighter military scanner that does not care about the rocks.
Yeah.
It will not filter rocks or will filter out rocks. And on top of those, you can set filters when radar or scanners are done. You will be able to set filters on your scanners to scan for specific things. So in, let's say, a mole eventually, you'll be able to say, I only want to scan for these quantities of these materials or these materials in rocks. So if it finds that, it can say that rock has it or that rock doesn't. So we are still waiting on, most of these components to actually come to fruition, and we'll talk about why we're still waiting on all these components later on in the show. The next one is quantum drives, the component that allows you to travel at speeds not achievable by just thrusters alone. There is a fake science version of this back in the writer's guide that I didn't really have time to put in here. But basically, it puts your ship into a state that allows it to move through space much quicker than physics would normally allow you. Quantum fuel tanks, same thing as fuel tanks, just for quantum fuel, which is refined quantanium. The jump drive is an addition or an add-on to the quantum drive. Little side lore is it came about because of a broken quantum drive. They found the jump drive thing. So that kind of clamps onto your quantum drive. And I assume at some point those will also be interchangeable, kind of like quantum drives. I don't know that I didn't see anywhere where it said interconnection between the two. Do you have to buy like the same jump drive to your quantum drive, or can you mix and match? I didn't see anywhere where they had anything about that, so have to keep an eye on that. Computers is one of the most convoluted components because it's been called many things and it's had many different definitions over the years. As far as I understand currently, it was formerly called avionics. Avionics motherboards or modules, lots of different things. Sometimes even referred to as just avionics. A computer is a component that will allow you to modify or improve your ship systems by adding additional functionalities. So a computer holds computer blades. Those are not subcomponents, but they are components of components, but not subcomponents. Very confusing, I know. And for those, you have an avionics panel, a blade that you put into the computer, which, yes, you're going to want that, but you also have other slots you can put them in. Some will be empty. So, for instance, the Carrack, even though it has those giant server racks, the actual computer is in the middle of the bottom bridge, and it kind of rises up from the floor. It's much smaller space than those giant 8 server racks. And in those, it's only a medium computer. So you're going to have avionics in there. You're probably going to have a targeting solution in there. So you don't have a lot of space to put other things. So for instance, to slave one turret to the pilot or to make an AI turret, it will take an entire slot for a single turret. It's not going to be all turrets. So you need to pick and choose what functionality you want your ship to have through the very finite amount of computer slots you have. Batteries are a component that most ships will have. Specifically, these functions like real-world batteries that can charge up and use whilst the power plant is offline for both redundant and lower signature performance. So this was something that is not on a lot of the different pages, but I do remember them saying specifically. Pretty sure they mentioned it when they were talking about the Steve, but also it was mentioned in the QA for the Ares. But they did say most ships will actually feature some batteries, which will be important, like they said, for stealth, but also making sure you don't die the second your power goes off. Yay. Armor, but that thing that a lot of people are waiting for. This is just additional plating on top of the hull. Hull armor and armor on top of the hull as a component are separate. Armor can take many forms, whether that be just extra metal or specific types of armor, composite armor or blast armor, kind of like that. Not in game yet, but they've they have it somewhere in their internal spreadsheets to get done. Life support, something that they are working on now, something that is kind of crucial to today's show. A component that filters the air, generates oxygen, or pours it from tanks. It also is responsible for the temperature control. And I believe we'll be touching more on the temperature control in a later episode. O2 tanks, mentioned just before, place to store oxygen. Not necessarily the main place to get oxygen, but if you're evacuating oxygen from a room, it will need to go into a tank. So, gravity generator. Gravity generators on a ship or can be put on a ship or a station and can be switched on, low power, or off, or low gravity or off. EMP generator generates an electromagnetic pulse or field. And the QED generator generates a quantum enforcement, or is a quantum enforcement device, can quantum entangle, so pull stuff out of quantum or hold stuff from going into quantum. So the Mantis and the Atreus, what is it called? Antares, that one. Both have QED devices.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yep.
Thruster. So how all of these sites have these all listed is quite odd, so I'm going to read through what I have. That's thrusters are a key part of a spaceship, crucial for getting around, and also a key area to manage in both fuel consumption and emissions. So you have several types of thrusters. All right, so you have main thrusters, basically the big ones on the back of your ship. There's a primary thrust on the ship that are responsible for making it go forwards. These are the most important ones on traditional constructed ships and provide the bulk of forward momentum. Retro thrusters, having moved from the maneuvering section of the old matrix, these are now counted in the main thruster category, as they are crucial thrusts set on the ship. There is little point having the bigger thrust round if you can't stop in time. Most ships have that problem. They can get up to speed, but they can't stop. But that's because they don't have retro thrusters. Generally found in pairs, some ships may have more or less depending on their role, and having damaged ones can cause serious issues when trying to stop. VTOL thrusters. These thrusters provide lift in the Z plus axis and can either be fixed in one position or provide continuous upward thrust, or can pivot when needed to provide that thrust to the back. Cargo, or particularly ships cargo. Okay, I think it's supposed to be cargo. In particular, ships tend to have fixed VTOL thrusters on the underside if they are required to enter exit planets or moons with gravity to aid them in leaving the atmosphere and to slow their descent. If a ship does not have any dedicated VTOL thrusters, it is not the end of the world. It just requires more forethought under those circumstances mentioned before. So something like the C2 has toggleable VTOLs. The Valkyrie also has toggleable VTOLs that go into main thrust. And the Caterpillar has dedicated VTOLs. It's all under it. There's 20 different VTOLs under the ship. But there are things like the Freelancer that doesn't. So what can you do? You have maneuvering thrusters. So you're only saving grace at that point. So maneuvering thrusters come in two flavors: fixed and gimbal. Fixed maneuvering thrusters provide instant thrust output, as they do not need to align to the dedicated or desired vector first. This gives a quicker response, leading to more agility. The downside is you need to have more of them, a minimum of 12 on a ship, to provide the ability to move in any direction with 6 off. Gimbal maneuvering thrusters provide thrust in one or more axes as they pivot to rotate to align themselves to the desired vector before providing thrust. This allows less thrusters to be needed at the cost of slower response rate and smaller amounts of power required to move them into position, making them valuable to power management problems. So that is all the components that I could find, and that's quite a rant of them. I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page on what components we know about. If you guys know any other components, let me know. I'm sure there are some that we missed. These are just the ones that I could come up with over the past week. So, what are some of the things that they've said? So, Are there any components that we don't know about? Coffee machines. That's furniture. That goes in the furniture category. It's not component. Okay, so
it's part of the life support system.
Absolutely, I agree. In the shipyard ship items post, there was a question: are there other items that can be swapped out on my ship? And they replied, absolutely. The list here is just the items that are on the ship matrix, or for our example, the ones that we could find. And we have many more in planning or in game, such as scanners, batteries, and armor. We did go over those, but basically there are more items that we have here on the list. For instance, O2 tanks don't really show up anywhere. The only place they show up is when they talk about the resource system. And life support is only mentioned in a couple places, and it doesn't have a description, so I had it right in the description myself. And these only showed up over the past couple years. So further on in development, even post 1.0, we could see more components being added, more specific. We don't have any of the mining-specific components on this list. So no lasers. We don't have tractor beams up here. Actually, I didn't even put in weapons for some reason. So we don't have any of those. These are mostly, so what we have is all internal. So there's plenty of other types of mounts and things. Are guns components or are they mount? I don't know. You decide. All right. So let's get into what differentiates an item from the next item down. Starting with grades, and then we'll move on to classification. So every swappable item in the game is assigned a grade for ease of comparison. This should be your first port of call when deciding what items to buy and swap out, as it gives you a simple scale to compare against. Additional details about the individual nature of an item with B variable in the purchase screen will be available. I think that's another typo. They had a lot of typos in these older ones. Will be available in the purchase screen for any vendor. But for a place to start, we provide a simple letter grade. Different grades have different values added to them. Starting from A and moving down, A is best possible performance, usually has an additional sub-item slot. B is a good upgrade to performance, may have an additional item slot, or may have an additional sub-item slot. There we go. C, the standard item for most ships to be default. Sure. Average performance. D, lower grade generally makes up the NPC/AI populace, good for emergency use to get through troubles. So basically, this is your spare, the D grade. When you don't want to spend, the
donut.
high money, your donut, yeah, D for donuts. When you don't want to have $100,000 or 100,000 credit component just sitting around, you just buy a D tier, and if your power plant goes out, you just hit it with a wrench, see if it works, but if not, switch to your donut. Item classifications. So these are going to be what their purposes are. In the future, 3.x patch, we plan to assign every ship and every item a component class. This means players will only be able to put an item of that class into a ship that can utilize it. I don't know how specific that is, because we can definitely mix these up right now in-game. Anyway, the classifications are military, civilian, stealth, industrial, and competition. Military, the best overall at the item's functionality at the expense of emissions and cost. Civilian, most common, wide range of behaviors to suit cost. Options to approximate all other categories, but not as specific. Stealth, vastly reduced signatures and consumption at the expense of functionality. Industrial, reliably high output and low wear, high emissions. Competition, higher performing than military, but at the expense of durability and stealth. Performance over anything. So that kind of gives you what kind of scenario do you want these to go into. As far as I know, there's not a clamp on what classification you can use with what ship. I've put military grade stuff in not military ships. I don't know what they were talking about in the intro or the little paragraph before it for assigning ships this thing. Not heard
Either
about
that was something that they changed their minds on, or it's something that they haven't implemented. I don't see them implementing it, but that remains to be seen. Who knows?
Yeah. Frankly, it sounds kind of ridiculous to me. Like, why not? Why put why clamp that down? Like, that seems not redundant. What is it called? There's a word there.
Unnecessary. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically unnecessary. That's what. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, we have video. We have video now.
Oh, yeah. And so I found this actually looking through my portion, but it's related to Nazeris's, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to save this and we're going to play this. Just because so as part of the Spectrum Pulse, this is a 2-part Spectrum Pulse, and we're doing the first part tonight. We'll do the next part. I don't know if it'll be the next episode that we do because we have the monthly reports. It'll be the next time we do a Spectrum Pulse, so probably with the next Roadmap Roundup episode.
So we have like the next 3 episodes planned.
Yeah, we for the first time ever, we are planned out like a month in advance. I have another one because I just thought of something else I need to do because I did the science one and I didn't come back for exploration. Yeah. But the one of the concerns that I've seen brought up many times in regards to resource management, engineering, gameplay is everybody's like, oh gosh, it's going to take them forever to go back and rework all these ships to add components to them. And
I mean, they don't help themselves when they say, oh guys, we're finally like updating the freelancer to involve I don't know why they picked a freelancer to say, hey, we're updating it. We've talked about this on the podcast before.
Mm-hmm.
The tech debt portion of the roadmap. There are random ships in there at random times that get updated with these small little things.
All the time.
Like,
all the time.
For some reason, they just have to televise they're doing the freelancer. I don't know why that had to be told. Like
It's just an example of people latching on to pieces of information and then saying that one thing means something else, and it's like, no, that's not what they said. And there's no reason to believe this from this piece of information. Yeah,
they didn't talk about the Pisces getting updated when the C8R came out. They didn't talk about the MSR getting updated when the C2 came out. And all of these, like, they keep adding these different things to all these ships. Like, now there's a button to open your Pisces, and you don't have to just walk up to the door. They didn't make a giant announcement. They didn't put that on the progress tracker, updating Pisces. CIG said they are updating the freelancer, so it's just like, why? Just leave that in tech debt. Leave it alone. I don't know why they had to say something about it. Because people get like, oh, they've said something minute, something's happened. It's like they're just like, it's touch-ups. It's making sure it stays in line with the current like metrics of the game, and by metrics I mean like power performance wise. So they're making sure the materials are correct. The whole C is ready to go into the game, so they have a bigger library for MISC, so they can just apply what they have just to the freelancer. It's gonna take them like a week.
Yeah, whenever we do these things, like we try to cover the information about what we know from CIG regarding whatever it is we're talking about. Like, okay, this is how this is intended to work. This is what they've talked about in the past. This is how things have changed, as the game has developed and, they've updated their designs. But we also try to get some information, in order to put context about where certain things are in development. And so when I was looking for information on subcomponents, I accidentally ran into this quote that I'm going to play related to components and that component work for resource management and, the ships that don't have them, in order to put in a better context of, how much work this actually is and isn't. So we'll play that really quick. Two of the resources for what Nazeris was talking about and reading through, we have a very old engineering doc. If you Google it, and again, all of this is in the show notes that'll be on the YouTube episode. It's always a Google doc, but engineering ship component systems talks a lot, this is a good example of where you can go through and you can look at this stuff and you can see how much things have changed and how little things have changed in between this, which was way back in 2013, to this, the shipyard articles in 2017, 4 years later, and 6 years passed from now, to what we have in game right now and what they've been talking about with resource management as of late. And you're like, oh, you know what? The design of these things really has not changed all that much. It has not fluctuated all that much. The overall theme of things is very much the same, with small changes here and there. And so when people think, oh, everything's subject to change and everything's going to change drastically, and I don't believe any of it until I see it because it could change, and it's like, well, you're being kind of dramatic, because most things are not that way. Most things have little changes. The big cataclysmic changes are very few and far between. So I don't think that mindset is very well founded, because, yeah, those things happen occasionally, but in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't happen all that often. So let's play this quote. And this is from Star Citizen Live, all about spaceships. This was December 6th, 2019, so 3.5 years ago. And I'm actually going to put on the closed captioning so you can see that, what he's saying.
Question number 2. What can you tell us about the status of implementing physicalized components?
Well, so that's something that we can both talk about. Paul's getting worried he's not going to.
Is it?
Because for a lot of the ships, we deal with a concept point now. Is we have the metrics for all the, the components.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So we have a new concept artist who started with us about 5.5 months ago. So we've been started as a junior, and so we've slowly been running him through the mill, as we say, and so we've been giving him components to look at. I mean, it's a lot better now that we've got actual metrics. Yeah. Everything's better now that we've got metrics, and so it's really just sort of making our way through the massive list of manufacturers that you guys have made for us. Thank you, Will and Dave. And just figuring out what the style guide is, basically, from my side of things.
And then pretty much every ship in the last 2-3 years, concept-wise, has had the placement of them identified at concept. So when the production teams come to them, they're built. You'll have seen it in sort of ships. Sort of Terrapin was the first big one that really went to town with the component hatches, so you could see where they all go. And then everything since then has them, and everything before then it has a plan for where they're going to go. In terms of actually putting the physical items in those places. So this quarter, one of the vehicle teams actually did the preliminary work to be able to place actual items inside the object containers, which can then connect to the vehicles, which gives us the ability to put them in place, and then down the line gives us the ability to shoot them from the outside, do all your physical damage to them. The stopping point has always been, up until now, and still a little bit now, that everything inside an object container can't talk to the vehicle that it's within, which has stopped like Retaliator modules from progressing, because we needed to have the missile launchers inside the object container so that it could all be swapped out with the entire bay. But we've got the groundwork for that now. Next.
So basically, what they said is that from the Terrapin, from basically every ship since 2016, so whether it's released or in concept, but every ship since like mid-2016 has their components. And just because we can't see them, just because the hatch doesn't open, doesn't mean that they're not there. The spot for them is there. The item is there. There may be some artwork in order to make the hatch open up really, and then be able to see the component and physically remove it. But that's not a huge, massive process. There is no, going back and reworking all these ships in order to, they didn't think about that because the component hatch doesn't open, and if it doesn't open, then it isn't there, it doesn't work. No, these things aren't massive art things for them to do. It's not a huge big deal for them to put the new hatch that has functionality. That they built the hatches, And this is an anvil hatch. This is a crusader hatch. What have you. So for them to be able to go back and add those to the ships that don't have them, in order to be able to see the physicalized component, and then the component actually be workable. These aren't massive rework things. This is just a little bit of artwork here and there from the vehicle content team to be able to do this for all the ships. And that's why, people think, oh, resource management isn't going to be coming for forever because they have to go back and do all the backlog for the gold standard for these ships. And it's like, no, you don't have to do that. They've talked about how these are little things that, take them short periods of time, that they do in between sprints, to work on. But the under the hood system of resource management for ships is something that they've been working on for like every ship for a couple of years now. And they basically have refactored everything. We'll talk more about that the next time we get into this. But this is why I think that resource management is coming a lot sooner than we may think, and coming for more ships than we may think, because there's been a lot of statements and updates about the work where people glossed over things that were said that provide very good context for where they actually are with the project. And it isn't just the whole A and the hammerhead. Moving on from components, we're going to move into subcomponents, because that's one thing that we don't have very much information on, and something we don't interact with in game at all right now. You can buy components to upgrade your ship. You can buy weapons. Those things you can change on your ship in order to make it function the way you want, to provide the benefits that you want. If you want to have a more fuel efficient quantum drive or a faster quantum drive, if you want to have a shield with a larger shield health pool or faster regen, there's all these different ways in which you can customize your ship based off of what's important to you. But the plan is to be able to further customize your ship in a lot more ways than we realize with subcomponents. And so what I did is I used starchives.com, and it's something that Nazeris and I use all the time when doing the research for these episodes. So if you're not familiar with Starchives, it's just archives with ST in front of it. .com. It allows you to put in a search for keywords and search all of CIG's videos ever. And basically it searches the transcript from it. Areno EDM says, I have my entire fleet planned around salvaging and upgrading components. Yeah, it's going to be a lucrative business, I think, and that's the kind of salvage I've said it before on the podcast, but that's the gameplay I'm most interested in outside of combat and medical, is finding a derelict and, someone's scraping the hull or you're cutting off pieces, but before that, going over and EVAing and opening up the component lockers and pulling out the components, opening up the ship storage lockers and grabbing the armor and the weapons and stuff, but basically taking anything of value off the ship before you crunch that can. I think that's classic sci-fi space gameplay. It's one of my, and it's something that's always been very gamified, and in Star Citizen, it's going to be very visceral in that, you have to do, the new EVA mechanic. Maybe you'll be able to dock to a derelict, but a lot of times you're going to have to be doing the EVA and, pushing and pulling yourself through, a derelict without gravity in order to do these things. It's going to be challenging and potentially dangerous, but, it's going to be also fun and rewarding, because especially like going through the ship of, oh, okay, what components did they have? Did they have any upgrades? And, oh, look at what we found. We found a grade A military, shield generator, and it's in perfect shape. This is going to be worth a fortune. Or look what I found in these lockers. That's the kind of gameplay I'm interested in. But with subcomponents, oh, go ahead, Dan, sorry.
It took me a second to find it. So, since we don't have the progress tracker, thank you, Shiny, again. On the Shiny tracker, and you might not have even been able to see this on the progress tracker, the only team currently working on resource management is the EUPU gameplay. The vehicle content team did have some work to do. That was from October to December. That was the entire vehicle team. Okay, vehicle feature had some, but vehicle content, the people who actually like touch the art of the ship, worked for 3 months on resource management. So let's debunk the whole it's going to take them forever. They worked for 3 months and they're not working. So yes, it's a bit of speculation, but they're good. The backlog's good. It's fine.
Yeah, vehicle feature and vehicle content have been doing a lot of work already alongside the gameplay feature team. But there's been a lot of work on resource management over the, here we are in Q2, or no, we're right here, sorry, Q2 2023. Here's the schedule going into Q3. This is gameplay feature, so we'll get that Q4 schedule with the next update. But the work goes back to the very beginning of the progress tracker in January of 2021. And yeah, there's a lot of part-time work, but there's also, here we are, Q2 2022, and here's a lot of,
the 2022, yeah.
Yeah, here's a lot of full-time work from EU gameplay feature, and then vehicle feature, full-time, and then full-time from vehicle content. So it's
I feel like
it's
somewhere
really
around what was it, Q2 2020, is that what you said? 2022? Yeah, Q2 2022. I feel like there was some like mix up in how like the management of the company, or 21, whatever it is, whatever the mix up happened, because going through all of the roadmap updates as I build out the spreadsheet, like since 2019, they've been, well, specifically 2021 or 2020, a lot of stuff. It got fast on what they're developing. There's a lot of stuff coming out. Like it's kicked into high gear, and I don't know if that's just because they finally figured out what they were doing, or they actually like got a structure internally that actually lets them actually build the game without basically making it an R&D project and actually having the goals set before them. I don't know what happened, but over the past couple of years, they've really kicked into high gear. Not just with Squadron, but with Star Citizen as well.
exponential growth too. Like you can go back. And
that's true. That's true.
And with the funding going up like crazy, they've also hired a crap ton of people in the last 3+ years.
But that wouldn't like give part-time to full-time work. That wouldn't necessarily make that transition. That's a priority shift.
Yeah.
So interesting. Like I'm just happy it's getting done.
Yeah. The subcomponents part is interesting to me because we don't think about, subcomponents right now because we don't generally get to interact with them, but we actually have subcomponents in game already. And people don't realize that the modules on your mining lasers are subcomponents. In that subcomponents are meant to be they're meant to be consumable in nature, in that they have like a shorter, they provide a benefit, or they amplify a certain value relative to that component, but they do it for a period of time. Now, the mining modules have a shorter service life. They're supposed to be, I know they've changed, how long they last for since they first came out, but just like with so many other aspects of gameplay in Star Citizen, where mining is really the sort of template for how things are developed and the sort of depth that they're looking for. Well, we have mining modules that are mounted on your different mining lasers in order to amplify, statuses, would that be a word, or effects that you want, or negate ones that you don't, in order to optimize your mining operations, to be able to do what it is you want to do, whether it's break a heavier rock, or break rocks faster, or have less inert material, or if you're not very good at mining, you can make it so that way you take less damage, or something. there's a lot of different statuses that the mining modules allow you to have in order to customize your gameplay and really make it do what it is that you want to do, whether it's just personal preference or it's based around the scenario that you're in, like depending on the type of rock that you're, trying to mine. Well, every component has subcomponents. Cromtac says, "This is timely. I'm in my prospector for the first time after watching several mining videos. I can't wait to get home. I have a mole. I haven't taken it out in over a year and a half. And so I'm looking forward to relearning everything mining with people who know how to do it. Because obviously, if you hang out in my server, you know I love doing co-op things. And so whether it's combating the bug menace as in Starship Troopers or mining rocks, I want to do it with other people, especially with people who are better at it than me and can show me the ropes. And so I'm really looking forward to trying all the changes that have come out to mining, because it seems from what everybody said, it's in the best place it's ever been, even when people were saying, "Oh, it's in a really good place." Like they put a lot of thought into it. I'm really interested to try it out. But this image that I have on screen is actually from my mouse disappeared. Here. So if you're looking for the original image, not only is it can be in the show notes, but it's in the Shipyard article, Other Items, where they talk about all the components and the grades and stuff. And you can click on it. It's right here. And it's actually a humongous image. It's huge. But if we zoom in, that's how big it is. And that's how much detail there is on these things. And so let's zoom out a little bit. Yeah. But you have to zoom in that much in order to see what the different things that these different components can do. And so they just have a single word. And so it doesn't tell you too much about what they are, but it does give you an idea of the scope of subcomponents. And these are just the subcomponents for things like your power plant, like your shield generator, different things like that. But subcomponents goes a lot further than that, and we'll talk about that when we play a clip that I've made here in a second. But you can see that there are, they have different manufacturers: Sakura Sun, Wilsop, Juno, and then like the B, I guess, is for other brands. I don't know if that's.
Well, I see Artcore.
Is that Artcore? Yeah, there's Artcore. Yeah. I don't know if that's an Artcore one, but some of them look like Artcore and some of them don't. A lot of them have AC and some of them don't. I think it's all Artcore, but these are just some of the ones that they've concepted. But the energy, so you could say that the energy subcomponent makes it so that it uses that component, the component that it's in uses less energy. Or cooling, requires less cooling to, or stays cooler. So you could use a cooling subcomponent and then overclock that component and it wouldn't overheat. Overrun, don't know what that means. Performance, would probably just generally amplify the base characteristics of that component. Malfunction, reduce the rate of malfunctions. Damage, maybe these are prevent the component or help reduce damage to the component, like from getting getting shot or energy surges and stuff. Kinetic, or maybe kinetic prevents from like kinetic damage, and damage prevents from maybe like relays overloading. Scan block makes it so maybe you can't see what those components are. Spectrum block, magna block, infra block, impact. Whoops, not what I meant to do.
Getting so many ideas. I've seen this image like 1,000 times, but as you're going through it.
And then at the top, you can see that they're broken up into, the overall categories. So you have the efficiency modulators, the protection inhibitors, and detection blockers. And these are just examples. There's probably going to be a lot more, but this is what they have made so far. And so this is a pretty cool image. Again, like I said, it's going to be in the show notes so you can look at it. But what I did...
So far as of October 2017.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just for components like shield generators, like your coolers, your power plants, what have you. There is going to be more to that. But we'll get into that video. And this video is about 10 minutes long. But what I did is I went into Starchives and I just searched subcomponents. And I went through every listing from Starchives and watched them all. And I clipped the parts that are most relevant to the conversation, because sometimes they're not even talking about subcomponents. It's subcomponents to like something for mission design, or something like that. But there's different segments that I clipped, and I'll play each one, and I want everybody to listen closely as I play each one. And after each one, we'll talk about what they said and what our thoughts are. We'll circle back at the end. But there's some really key takeaways in these, and I want to see if you guys pick up on some of the things that I picked up on as we're watching this.
That doesn't sound confusing enough.
And repair is going to be tied in with reclaiming quite a bit, because we're going to need these resources that you're gathering.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, and I didn't put text on it because I didn't want it to mess up with the visual of it. But I also, like I said, all this is going to be in the show notes. And so what I did for the show notes is I put, obviously, the link to the original video that this is from, as well as I mentioned the timestamp, and then I copied the transcript and edited it to make it readable. And so this first clip is from the May subscribers town hall featuring the LA design team, May 25th, 2016.
You can also turn on closed captionings. They're auto-generated.
Talking about stripping, the hull off of derelict ships, and you gain those materials to then.
Let's start at the beginning.
That doesn't sound confusing enough.
And repair is going to be tied in with reclaiming quite a bit, because we're going to need these resources that you're gathering. We're talking about stripping, the hull off of derelict ships, and you gain those materials to then craft new components or subcomponents to shove into like a fuse. You'd make a fuse or something. I mean, this is like our design doc right now, so we're not in the implementation phase, but our hope is to have some gameplay where it's really fun to to put these fuses in and like make it work again. Maybe even think like a BioShock mini game or something. I don't know, but like
the pipes.
The pipes. Yeah.
It won't be pipes, but there'll be something. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, the subcomponents are going to be a huge part of that, for also, tuning and adding some character to your individual loadout. So even if we both have the same ship with the exact same manufacturer and line of parts, I could have all of my subcomponents in those parts leaned, if I want to say, focus more on energy cooldowns, making sure all my systems are back up and replenishing faster, where yours may be just raw output, raw performance. You want the biggest number on the power plant output, the biggest number on the shield health output.
We've been looking to have those subcomponents tie directly into the behavior and the performance of that component. So you'll have your base stats that is the item itself, but then when you put the subcomponents in, or you alter out the subcomponents that it already comes outfitted with, that will shift that balance a little bit. Like, you can think of it like those are the points that you can move around on your stat sheet, but you can bolster it a little bit towards this performance or that. Depending on what you need. If you need more durability on this high performance, low durability component, a subcomponent might be a good way to do that. They're also the easiest as far as a field repair, because you just remove a thing and put a new thing in. So that gives you an element of like that consumable for repair.
So there are some key words in there, and this is back in literally 7 years ago. Pardon me. And the first thing that I latched onto is they're talking about how repair is going to be attached to reclaiming. Well, reclaiming is salvaging. And how you will be able to salvage materials and use those salvage materials to craft things. And we already have the first iteration of that. And no, I don't think we're going to be able to, make a pyro multi-tool out of hole scraping material. But I do think that by salvaging materials, from a wreck, you will be able to take those materials, especially after they're sorted, in order to make replacement fuses. Because fuses are the things if you're repairing and maintaining a size 3 shield generator or a power plant, you won't be able to. They just talked about that in the most recent SCL. You won't be able to take that size 3 and above power plant out of your ship. You'll have to do it at a station. But you will be able to repair them. And those power plants or components that size and even lower, but especially in the size 3, size 4 range, what you will be able to do is, as those things take damage, they not the component itself won't initially take damage, but they'll blow fuses. And without those fuses, they have higher risk of taking more damage, higher risk of failing or having impacts to their output. And during to repair that, you can go through and replace the fuses within that power plant to keep it running, or that shield generator. So you not only will have fuses that you replace within the component, but also the subcomponents, which they can become damaged or destroyed more easily. They don't have a long service life like the actual component itself, but they're easily replaceable in aviation with helicopters. With my Black Hawk that I ride on all the time, there are line replaceable components, the little small things that are mounted onto the engine that do things on top, do things that help the engine function. And then there's the engine itself. And, you can't field replace the engine. The engine has to be, the aircraft has to go into the hangar, and an actual airframe and power plant technician, has to remove the engine and do a whole tear down and all that sort of stuff, and put in a new jet engine. But my 15 Tangos, my maintainers within the unit, they can replace the different add-ons on the engine, in the accessory module. None of this is classified, I promise. We're not having a World of Tanks moment right now. But they can do these line replaceable things. And Star Citizen has implemented almost the exact same thing, in that, you can't easily replace the entire component, for a large component, even on a size 2 component, you can't take that out by hand. You have to have a tractor beam to take it out by hand. But you can do the line repairs of replacing the fuses and replacing the modules, and so, or the subcomponents. And so I thought that was really interesting how they talked about 7 years ago how you'd be able to craft fuses in order to repair your components and keep your ship running. And so that to me is probably the lower tiers of crafting, as far as like electronic type things go, that if you're and creates value for those salvaged materials. I think the other parts that were interesting is where they talked about how you can use the subcomponents to take 2 exact same ships with the exact same components. They're all spec'd out with grade A this, competition that, and based off of what your preferences are or what the situation is, you can tune them with subcomponents to do different things. And essentially it's almost like creating a variant. And that's actually something that we're going to talk about in Armchair Admirals and Generals. Sergeant Tickles was a door gunner, and I forget what his full job description is, but he worked on Air Force Pavehawks. I fly in Army Blackhawks. They are very similar aircraft, but because of the different, they have differences in their components and essentially subcomponents, it makes them. They have different performance characteristics, even though they otherwise they largely look utterly the same. It's a real life thing, and it's not just with Blackhawks and Pavehawks. There's lots of different things that do that. And so I thought that it's really interesting that CIG is taking that sort of real world influence and gamifying it with the use of subcomponents within the whole component architecture. And I think that was the only other thing that was in there. But they're already testing this system right now with mining. With the mining laser heads and the mining subcomponents that uses the same under the hood coding and architecture that they're going to use for components and subcomponents as part of the greater resource management system. So it's pretty cool. So let's get into the next part of the clip. And this next part is Star Citizen Reverse the Verse Live, Gameplay Systems and AI from February 16th, 2018.
Follow up on the mining thing. It says from the live chat. It says, speaking of different things to mine, will we have to swap basic mining tools if we want to extract liquids versus ore versus gas? Are there different? Are we thinking different lasers, different tools, different attachments, kind of thing?
Yes, I definitely don't want to have a tool that does it all, or there might be a tool that does it all, but at very low efficiency.
Okay.
So you will have a tool that. All of our components, all of our items have subcomponents. So you'll be able to configure that laser to whatever you want to achieve.
All right, second question. What about the subcomponents?
So that was a shorter clip, but basically he just, Dan Truffin just reiterated what, I was just talking about. I got a little bit ahead of myself. But, he was talking about mining lasers, but basically every other component is going to be able to do this. And the mining lasers is really just the first step in this process and the test bed for it. But you're going to be able to take those subcomponents that I showed you, place them in your shield generator, place them in your power plant, and the impact might not be significant. The impact can stack, but, you can basically, you could min-max it with 3 of the same thing, or you could have a little bit more diversity. But if you've played any RPG game and you've put runes or gems or whatever, onto your shield or your sword in order to add different attributes to it, it's the exact same thing, only for spaceships and the components that they use. And you're basically, your spaceship is your character, and your shield generator is your tower shield, and your power plant is your chest plate, and you're able to modify, either add in traits or characteristics, or amplify ones that are already intrinsic to it with subcomponents. So let's get into this next part.
All right, second question. What about the subcomponents for ship weapons and other components?
Again, I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce it. This one is from Calling All Devs, Piracy versus Griefing. And this one I thought was really interesting because it talks about something that most people probably aren't aware of at all.
All right, second question. What about the subcomponents for ship weapons and other components? We first heard mention of this a couple weeks ago, actually, that we got our ships, and then we got our components, and now there are going to be subcomponents. So where are we at with the subcomponent system?
Okay, so the ship weapons, that's actually interesting because it's pretty much the other way around. So for the ship weapons, all the components, everything like the asset is ready. Because we already knew that this was coming up. We want the player to be able to swap out specific parts of the weapon, only upgrade the barrel, only upgrade the cooling unit, the firing unit, and so on. So we made our art assets ready to support that. So that actually works for all weapons, I think, released after 3.0, so except the legacy ones. But the system's not there, so you can't yet swap it out. And you can't upgrade specific parts yet, which then has an influence on the weapon. But that's also on our plate and scheduled in the backlog.
Gotcha. So Art anticipated it. Art has been working on it since basically for 2018, since 3.0 came out. Now we just need to do the backlog of all those weapons that came before, and then our design and engineering and programming teams need to get to the building the system that allows the actual switch out.
Pretty much, yeah.
So yeah.
All right, who caught that? He wasn't just talking about components. He was talking about weapons. So just like your mining laser, is a weapon to smash rocks. Just like we will be able to customize our components, just like how you can customize your mining lasers right now, you'll also be able to customize your weapons. And it isn't just, they just started thinking about this and, they're going to have to go back to the drawing board. No, they've been planning on you having the ability to customize weapons for years, since, 2018, in that you'll be the people who are making weapons and have been making weapons since then have been making them from an art standpoint, giving them the ability so that way, building it art wise, that the barrel could be removable, or the cooling unit could be removable, or maybe if it's a laser, like the focusing lens or something like that. Making it so that way you can swap out the subcomponents of the weapon in order to give it characteristics and change its performance to suit your needs. And so we're not just doing it with mining heads. We're not just doing it with power plants and shield generators. We're doing it with your weapons, your guns. And so you'll be able to customize those as well. And they've already started the artwork on that. And he was talking about the end. So we're waiting on these teams to build the system to do it. That's what they've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, is building the system. That's what resource management is, building the system in order to support it. So that way, when you swap out something, it isn't just swapping it out for aesthetics. It changes the characteristics of that item. And so that's what's really exciting is, they talk so much about, with resource management, and, your shields and getting power to your weapons and the relays and all that. But it's also really interesting that, okay, you can get power to your weapons, but you could have customized the barrels on that repeater, in order to make it so that way they're more accurate, or maybe they have longer range, or maybe the, focusing lens creates a higher damage output. Red dot. So when it hits a ship, it does more damage. All these different things. You could make it so that way it's more resilient to to damage. You could make it so that way you have a larger capacitor pool for ammunition on your energy weapon. All these different things, you can think about all the different ways you customize your mining head, and what sort of things you might be able to do to customize your weapons on top of this. And they've already been planning for it as part of the overall system. And, for, 5-6 years back now, from an art standpoint, they've been building ship weapons to do this, in preparation for the work that's been ongoing for the last 2-3 years with resource management. So it's really cool to think about. This next clip is Reverse the Verse Live, The Shape of Ships, December 7th, 2018.
Moving on to the nose or neck section, cockpit, it remains pretty much unchanged at this point.
This is the going through the gray box of the Vanguard with John Crew.
You can see we've put in these component hatches. So these, a sweet little GIF or GIF, depending on where you come from on the internet, shows how they all fold out, so you have access to the items. These are size 2 items, so they're not removable by hand, but what you will be able to interact with them on is opening them up and having subcomponents inside, and these are your sort of booster consumable items that you can customize per item to improve the gameplay of that specific item. So On small ships where they're size 1 items, you can pick them up. Size 0 items, you can pick them up and change them out yourself. 2 and 3, you need to go to a repair station because they are too big to handle by yourself. You might be able to have a little mini tractor beam to get them out, but chances are they're not going to get out the ship. You have to go to a repair station. Size 4 capital items, they're permanently they're a fixture of the ship, so you have to go somewhere specific to get them repaired.
So yeah, very much in line with what we know, what we've been getting updated on recently. But he talked about the being able to you size 0, 1, 2, being able to open up the hatch, change out the subcomponents. They are consumable. They're consumable, and that I don't think your subcomponents for your shield generator or your power plant are going to have the same lifespan that your mining modules are. 20, 30 seconds, a minute, whatever. They'll last longer, but they won't have the same lifespan that the actual component itself has. And that's just like how it is in real life. The different subcomponents in the accessory module, in the main engines on a Blackhawk, those have to be replaced and are line replaced in much shorter hour requirements than the actual engine itself. The different subcomponents of the hydraulic system are the line replaceable units within them are replaced in much shorter hour intervals than the overall hydraulic compressor and motor system itself. It's the same way here we are in Star Citizen, and you can tell that there's probably a lot of aviation buffs within CIG and within the teams that have worked on this over the years, because they've copied a lot of principles from real life aviation aspects of the way aircraft work. So it's pretty cool to think about, and how far back they were thinking about this and how far back they were putting in the work to do these things. And this is the Vanguard from 2018, and they talked about how the Terrapin from 2016 has had this work done. And so when you see a ship that came out around the same time as the Vanguard and the component hatches don't open, just because they don't open, it's a very small amount of work to get the hatch to open, to be able to swap out the or if there isn't a component there, to be able to put one in that's already made and then make it work. That's just artwork. It doesn't, the artwork isn't what makes the system work under the hood. That's the difficult part, the part that they've been working on the past couple of years. Getting the ships up to an art place ready to work with a system that they're already going to have. That's that's not a big ask. So this next part, and I think we've got 2 more. Yeah. Is Inside Star Citizen and Origin Story 3.5 episode 0.5. It's a weird name. May 23rd, 2019. So 4 years ago.
A vehicle in Star Citizen universe isn't just the paint and form you can see from
a Vietnam in Star Citizen universe. Oh, geez.
From the outside, or the amount of cargo and legroom found within. It's all that and the individualized components that will determine much of the performance character for any ship that you call your own. And members of our props team have been working to define that discriminate personality between ship components and their sub-items. And now we've got Joel to show us just a little bit about this process.
Here we have a medium power plant. It's been opened up so you can see the interior and the sub-items within. Something that's quite important for us is that the interiors look and feel like these pieces of machinery that function, rather than having these sort of empty boxes that hold sub-items. One of the functions of having an interior is so that you can replace and change about the sub-items within. So we have these mechanisms that open up and display the sub-items in front of the player, so you can pull them out and put new ones in. You'll see here from inside the interior here that the sub-items are quite dense and complex in design, especially when compared to the exteriors. Another thing that's quite important to us is brand identity. So other than the obvious decals with logos on littered about, we want the forms to describe the manufacturer. So in this Aegis one, you've got a lot of flowing shapes, a lot of double chamfers, quite sophisticated, where in contrast you've got lightning power, where everything's a bit more utilitarian, there's more function over form sort of stuff going on. So what we've got here is, from an art standpoint, sub-items are finished, and we've got them all lined up here. We've got the manufacturers going along here, and aside each one you'll see a destroyed state. The idea is that over time these become worn and eventually destroyed, hence why you need to replace them. So each one has its own broken variant. So although the gameplay is still being worked on for this, we want the sub-items, the interiors and the ship items to look and feel believable when the player interacts with them, so that this really complements and supports the gameplay when it's ready to come through.
So pretty cool that they've been doing so much of the work for this in advance, even though here we are in 2023, they're still working on the system to support it. Hopefully, I think we'll be seeing it soon. But, years ago, they were working on the art. They've been working on, making it so the components actually open up themselves, having the components themselves have an interior, the working on the actual subcomponents that you'll be able to swap out. It's really cool that they've put this much thought into it in advance of the system actually being in place. And one thing that I thought was, I don't know if a lot of people notice this, but those would look like size 3 and size 2 components. And you could see that the size 3 had 3 subcomponent slots, and the size 2 only had 2 subcomponent slots. And so that suggests, that the larger the component is, the obviously more subcomponents and the more customization, the more modification you can make to them in order to give them greater attributes, potentially with like survivability and output. And so that's, part of the whole factors into the time to kill scenario in giving those the ability to not only repair those components and keep the ship fighting, but also augmenting the characteristics of those components. And so this last section is actually not directly related to the subcomponents themselves, but this part's interesting because it's almost exactly 2 years ago, and they were thinking about things that surround the subcomponents, not just the actual items and replacing them, or replacing them.
So with the engineer, it's more about, they can do everything like...
Sorry, this was from Star Citizen Live, Game Dev, Building NPC Behaviors.
Everybody else, they're, getting changed into whatever the relevant clothes are, or, finding somewhere to sit if they need a rest or things like that. But for the engineer, it's all about maintaining things. Their job is literally to inspect things to see if they're broken, repair things if it's fixed.
It's an archetype.
Yeah,
I guess.
exactly.
Is that the word?
Yeah, we basically use we call it activities, but yes, it is a sort of an archetype of a job to do. And in essence, I think what is good is that they actually, I think, compared to lots of games where I think usually tends to do stuff, but it's not really having an impact on anything, right? What we're trying to build is something that, whatever action they do actually has an impact on the game. So what we want to show today is imagine we have a wall panel that is split between 2 different sub elements that we call relay. And this relay can have sub components inside that are probably, like in our test, are fuses. These fuses can actually have gameplay impact, right? And they can break for different reasons. Then you, as a player, can go there and replace it. If the AI does, it has the same exact effect as what the player would do. So, for example, if you hire this guy, and you want him to be your engineer on board of your ship, you can then give him command and say, maintain all the wall panels in my ship, or I see in my map that this wall panel is broken. Can you repair exactly this one? And this is how we are building these behaviors, that they are sort of API of interface where you can control them in essence, it's like designer running a mission are kind of doing the same as a player would do when they, give commands to an NPC.
So
they actually went over a lot of terminology there. When Jared said archetype, there's a reason he didn't say yes, because that's not what they call them internally. They call it activities and behaviors. And if you've been following the podcast for any amount of time, you know that behaviors get us very excited. And the engineer behavior has been mostly complete for squadron purposes for a while. And they said verbatim in that video, behaviors are directable by the player. So, anytime we mention behaviors, remember that can be an employee on your ship. And specifically as it goes to this, you can tell them that item or just generally engineering.
Yeah,
very
it's
important terminology.
The gaming analog, and I tweeted about this because I'm actually going to end up writing a video about this. I just have to make the time for it. But I made a tweet to ask, the Star Citizen community, hey, do you like colony management sims or colony sims? And if you do like them, what ones do you play and which ones are your favorite? And a lot of people have said they do like them. They've had some suggestions and such. But if you're paying attention to that little clip, and if you watch the rest of the video, he shows you a demo of the behaviors and the activities that they've created for the NPC to be able to go up to a wall panel and open it up and replace a fuse. And that's the same activity that they'll use to open up a component hatch and replace a subcomponent or a fuse on that component. Basically doing maintenance work on a ship, or not just a ship, a location. It could be maintenance work at a station or your outpost or an underground facility. It's all the exact same thing. But the way that they're designing it, he talked about, you'll be able to tell them, hey, here is your assignment. You are an engineer, and I just want you to be maintaining the replacing the fuses and subcomponents on my components and on the ship, and basically keeping the ship running at tip top. And if you've watched the resource management videos, you've seen that they are able to basically create a priority list of what components and of the order of components and relays for functionality, so that the way that the ship will triage them. And that would be the same system that the AI would use. Okay, well, we've got these 3 things need to be repaired. This is the first one. Or you can give them a direct order and say, I want you to repair this one specifically because, I'm going to override the priority system where I haven't put it in place. It's the exact same thing that you do in colony management sims. If you play RimWorld, if you play Stranded Alien Dawn, or Space Haven, or any one of these colony management sims where you're basically setting priorities and you're setting priorities for a behavior. And okay, the AI, the NPC will be like, okay, this behavior is number 1, this behavior is number 2, and using this priority, I'm going to do these activities based off of this priority, from what you've set or what you've built into it. And it's the exact same thing. That's what they're building. And it's cool to me because this is 2 years ago, and they're working on these NPC behaviors and activities, obviously for Squadron, because it's going to be a thing, but also, those same behaviors and activities. That's the reason he spoke about it this way, is so that way they can take those and they don't have to remake them for when we have NPC crew. They're already ready to go. You just have to be able to hire them and assign them to your ship, and then use the API that they've created to say, okay, you are my engineer because I hired you because you have these traits, which again is a colony sim thing. Your colonists have traits and preferences, and
Okay, so now I'm thinking of in Firefly when they picked up Shepherd Book. They would just kind of sit there waiting for passersby to like, hey, we're going this way. What do you offer the crew for your journey over?
Mm-hmm.
Strawberries.
Yeah. 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 If you, and this is the impetus of the video that I'm going to do on resource management, and we're going to talk more about this when we do part 2 of this Spectrum Pulse. But Star Citizen is RimWorld, and RimWorld is Star Citizen when it comes to resource management and engineering. Because so much of this, the way that they're designing these systems is very similar to colony management systems, and Quantum runs off the resource management system. We're going to talk about that when we get into part 2. And so Quantum is just 100,000 colonist strong resource management system, colony sim, which is just nuts to think about, but it's it's all there, and it's crazy to think that with the components like Naz was talking about and the subcomponents like we just talked about, they've been putting in a lot of this work leading up to it.
Wasn't the 100,000 demo only Stanton?
Yeah, just Stanton.
100,000 times 100. 100 star systems. I mean, it won't be 100,000 for every star system, but generally, bad math is 100,000 times 100.
Was that 10 million? You just add 2 zeros.
I can't math in my head. 100,000 times
10 million.
100. 10 million. There you go. 10 million. 10 million quanta. That's bad math because Levski doesn't have that as much traffic as
but
Stanton. But
we're talking about millions of quanta.
Yeah.
In order
Easily
to probably. Yeah. And that's
imagine a city sim with millions of pedestrians. Not millions of number that says this is how much your population, but on screen pedestrians doing things I don't know if any of you know SimCity 5 or the SimCity 2015 that they showed every pedestrian in your city. It's that, but lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
Actually doing things. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, for this first part, the being able to not only Nazeris was talking about, we know that we have the ability to swap out our components, and that's something that people have been complaining about a lot recently because with the wipes and losing the components and weapons that you buy to upgrade your ships, that's a big part of the progression in the game as it stands right now. And so obviously that has a lot of value because people get upset when they lose them and, when they put that effort. And knowing that we're going to be able to even further that level of progression, that level of customization that we obviously put value into right now with subcomponents, and then add on to that with tuning, which we don't have much information on, but you will be able to, we had, you used to be able to, I don't know if you can still do it, but you just click a button and overclock your components. Well, that's what tuning is, but it's a permanent thing that you can do as part of what module was that on the Endeavor?
The Super Collider.
Yeah, the Super Collider. You'll be able to tune your components as well, not just add in subcomponents to them. And so the level of depth for being able to pick the components and weapons, or mining heads or salvage lasers that you want to use, and then buy the manufacturer that you like, at the grade that you want, and then add in the subcomponents that suit your gameplay style or the mission or contract at hand based off what you're mining, what kind of ship you're salvaging, what sort of combat you're going to be getting into. It's a pretty immense level of depth that I think I can't think of any game that's ever gone this far, especially not in the science fiction space sims, and
especially in first person.
Yeah. Oh, and it's coming together right now. We are we're nearing the implementation of resource management, and that's where all of this really comes to a head, where we're going to have a lot more decisions at our fingertips and a lot more freedom of choice, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah, we'll know where we... Hold on. We're waiting on Q4. Where is it? Upstream, right?
Yeah.
We have Q3 upstream.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's underground facilities. That's not the one. There's no work for Q3 in underground facilities. So tinfoil hats.
Oh, isn't that team downstream?
No, all the work currently going on is upstream.
And I already forgot which. This was I forget when they did this sneak peek. But the one I just put on screen, that was a sneak peek from the weekly newsletter, and it was one of the ones in 2021. To show, a case carrying subcomponents and a whole bunch of, some are broken, some are still good. I thought it was a really cool image. And it, shows that they're working on this stuff along with the
EUPU gameplay is the only people currently working on
underground facilities.
Resource management.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So underground facilities don't have any work in Q3, and the only work in Q3 for resource management, is EUPU gameplay. So
I need to get the project tracker back up.
I know, right?
I need Q4.
Give us the Q4.
Mm-hmm.
Start foaming at the mouth.
But that's all we have for part 1 of component therapy, this Spectrum Pulse. So stay tuned for part 2. Part 2, let's see. So this Wednesday the 7th, we should have the monthly reports. So we should be doing those next weekend. And then Wednesday the 14th, we should have the next roadmap roundup. I get home on the 16th, so I might be kind of occupied that weekend, but sometime that weekend, the following week, we'll get out an episode. We'll do part 2 of this Spectrum Pulse. We'll talk about resource management in depth, because we did everything for the whole thing. And I was like, Naz, if we do this all at once, it's going to be a 4.5 hour episode. So we're splitting it up. So we'll add some more things to it. The next part will be pretty, very juicy as well. But we're going to be talking about the resource management system and engineering gameplay as it relates to components and subcomponents, as well as the next roadmap roundup.
Speaking of the speed at which we're getting information right now, July, we're going to start getting the beginning of July, first, let's see, 14th, 28th. So the 12th of July, we're going to start getting the downstream for Q3.
Yep. Yeah, because that's
it's just there's so much, and that's going to come with the monthly reports. Oh my god, we're getting there's so much getting done. There's so much data flying our way. Stay tuned if you value your time.
Let's see. So, and that's. Oh, how do I get to it?
Which one?
I've been doing this on my tablet. Because that's all we have for this evening. So I'm trying to think. We need a suggestion. Chat, if you're still listening, chat, still hanging out with us, can I have a suggestion for a raid? Otherwise, I'm going to pick one. But just want to say thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us this evening. Naz, it's been fun. It's been too long since we did an episode. I don't like having these long breaks. I don't get my fix.
Yeah. But everything came together, and we now have the next 3-4 episodes maybe planned.
Mm-hmm.
We got some content. It's moving. Projects are moving forward.
People I follow that are online right now. Marcus the Way is playing Diablo 4. Soul Citizens are on.
Soul Citizens, absolutely.
Should we raid Soul Citizens?
Absolutely. They do so much for everyone.
Yes, I'm a big fan of Soul Citizens. All right, starting the raid.
Oh, and I should have the Storm video up this week as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah, make sure you post that in my Discord as well once you're done with it. All right, 13 ready to raid, and raiding now.
Bye, everyone. Be kind.
Goodbye. Thanks, everybody.